Should old acquaintance be forgot and never brought to mind? Should old
Hey everyone, welcome back to the channel. Have you ever taken a photo that just didn't look like what your eyes saw? Maybe the skies turned pure white or the shadows were just a black hole? That's the silent battle between your camera and the light, the struggle of dynamic range. Today I want to talk about what dynamic range really is, how it works inside your camera, how it compares to the human eye, and the most importantly, how much it really matters for wildlife photographers like us.
I will walk on glass, I will run 10,000 miles and more, I will give my eyes, if you lost yourself.
Dynamic range is simply the range of brightness your camera can record from the darkest shadows to the brightest highlights, while still keeping detail. We measure it in stops of light. One stop means doubling or halving the amount of light. A typical modern mirrorless camera, like my Nikon Z7, can capture about 13 to 14 stops of dynamic range at its base ISO, which is really impressive compared to older cameras that barely can reach 10 or 11 stops. Imagine your camera only had 2 stops of dynamic range. The entire world would collapse into just 2 tones. Pure blacks and maybe pure white. No midtones, no smooth transitions, just a very brutal contrast. Now, technically, even if a camera had only 2 stops and 8 bits of color depth, it will still record 256 tones. The problem isn't the number of tones, it's that all those tones are squeezed into a tiny slice of light. That's why the image feels like it collapses into harsh contrast. Not because the camera lacks tones, but because it lacks real-world light to spread them across. When you add more stops, the camera doesn't just add more grace, it expands the amount of light it can capture. Every stop doubles the range, giving the sensor more room to separate shadows, midtones and highlights. That's what dynamic range really is. How many steps your camera can see between pure shadows and pure lights. Now, let me show you something really cool. This will be our base image. Imagine this is how we see the world with our own eyes. And now, let's process that same landscape as if the camera had different dynamic range. Let's assume 8-bit depth, base ISO, and for simplicity, a black and white image. With 2 stops, everything becomes blocks, almost no details in shadows or highlights. With 4 stops, you start to see some substructure, but the image still looks harsh and contrasty. At 8 stops, the image becomes acceptable, very similar to what older cameras or basic smartphones can reproduce. But at 14 stops, everything changes. Smooth transitions, details in bright, dark and bright areas, and a natural, balanced look. This is why dynamic range matters, not to capture everything perfectly, but to give you enough room to recover the light you care about. But here is the catch. As you raise your ISO, the dynamic range shrinks. At ISO 100, my Z7 might have about 14 stops. By ISO 1600, it's closer to 11 stops. And at ISO 16400, you might only get 7 or 8 usable stops. That's because noise eats up the detail in the shadows, so your usable range gets smaller even though the sensor is the same. Now, how does that compare to our eyes? The human eye can handle somewhere between 20 and 24 steps of brightness in total, but not all at once. We adapt constantly. Our pupils shrink or expand, and our brain merges multiple exposures of reality in real time. That's why when you walk from bright sunlight into a dark forest, you don't think, oh no, I have lost my highlights. Your eyes just adapt. Your camera can't. It captures one single slice of that light, and if the scene exceeds its range, something's going to clip. Either the whites or the blacks. In wildlife photography, we face brutal light conditions. A bird half in the sunlight, half in the shadow, reflections on water, and a white sky behind it. These are extreme dynamic range situations. You could have 16 or 17 steps of contrast in one scene, but your camera can only handle 13 or so. That means something has to go. Either your highlights will blow out or your shadows will lose detail. So, instead of fighting that, the key is to learning how to choose. Expose for what matters most, the subject. If the birds is the story, protect it, even if the sky burns a little. That's not a mistake, it's intention. All right, let's talk practical. What can we do when the light is too much for the sensor? First, expose to protect highlights. Expose to the left, ATTL. When the light is strong, underexpose slightly. It's easier to recover shadows than to fix clipped whites. Your histogram should stay clear of the right edge, but once it touches it, that data is gone. Second, expose to the right. ATTR. When the light is soft, you can do the opposite, slightly overexpose, pushing your histogram just to the edge without clipping. This keeps shadows clean and full of detail. Third, shoot RAW. JPEG gives you 265 tones. RAW gives you around 16,000. One is a diet version of reality, the other is the full meal. Fourth, mind your ISO. Remember, at higher ISOs, your dynamic range drops fast. If you can, lower your ISO by using a tripod or a slower shutter, unless you're freezing action, of course. Fifth, recompose or use natural shade. Sometimes just stepping 2 meters to your left or to your right can balance the contrast, using a tree, a cloud, or the subject's own shadow. Sixth, try exposure bracketing, HDR, high dynamic range. Shoot 3 frames, one dark, one normal, one bright, and merge them later in Lightroom. It's not just for landscapes. If your subject is still, saying like a heron waiting to fish, it works wonders. Seventh, know your limits. Check dynamic range tests for your camera on sites like Photons to Photos. It helps you to understand where your camera performs best. Now, here's the thing. Even with all this technical control, no one captures everything, and you shouldn't try to. Some of my favorite wildlife photos have blown out skies, or deep shadows that hide half the scene. But they feel alive, because that contrast, that imperfection, is what gives emotion to your image. Just like life. It's the mix of light and darkness that make it beautiful. So, the next time you're out there chasing birds in difficult light, don't stress too much about the numbers. Dynamic range is just a tool, not the goal. Every stop of dynamic range is like an extra breath for the image. With too few, the photo suffocates, shadows crush it, and highlights burn it. But give it more room, and suddenly the photograph exhales, revealing all the light it always had inside. Understand it, master it, and then forget it when it's time to feel. Because what matters isn't how many steps your camera can handle, it's how deeply you connect with the light in front of you. Thanks for watching, my friends. If this helps you, give it a like and share it with someone who's fighting with their highlights today. And remember, keep your heart open, your lens ready, and your shadows full of stories. See you out there. Bye bye.
I will walk on